The Atari ST is a line of home computers from Atari Corporation and the successor to the Atari 8-bit family. The first ST model, the 520 ST, was released in June 1985. ST officially stands for 1632, which referred to the Motorola 68000's 16-bit external bus and 32-bit internals. The 1040 ST, released in 1986, is the first personal computer to ship with a megabyte of RAM in the base configuration and also the first with a cost per kilobyte of less than $1. The Atari ST is part of the 1632-bit generation of home computers, based on the Motorola 68000 CPU, typically with 512 kilobytes or more of RAM, a graphical user interface, and 3.5 floppy disks as storage. The ST was primarily a competitor to the Macintosh, Amiga, and, in certain markets, the Acorn Archimedes. Whereas the Amiga has custom graphics processors and sample-based synthesis audio, the ST has a basic frame buffer and a 3-voice synthesizer chip, but with a slightly faster CPU and a high-resolution monochrome display mode ideal for business and CAD. Its simple design allowed the ST to precede the Commodore Amiga's commercial release by almost 2 months. In some markets, particularly Germany, the machine gained a strong foothold as a small business machine for CAD and desktop publishing work. Thanks to its built-in MIDI, the ST enjoyed success for running music sequencer software and as a controller of musical instruments among both amateurs and well-known musicians. The ST was later superseded by the Atari ST, Atari TT, Atari Mega ST, and Falcon computers. Origins. The Atari ST was born from the rivalry between home computer makers Atari, Inc., and Commodore International. Amiga contract J. Miner, one of the original designers for the custom chips found in the Atari 2600 and Atari 8-bit family, tried to convince Atari management to create a new chipset for a video game console and computer. When his idea was rejected, Miner left Atari to form a small think tank called High Toro in 1982 and began designing the new Lorraine chipset. The company, which was later renamed Amiga Corporation, was pretending to sell video game controllers to deceive competition while it developed a Lorraine-based computer. Amiga ran out of capital to complete Lorraine's development, and Atari, owned by Warner Communications, paid Amiga to continue development work. In return, Atari received exclusive use of the Lorraine design for 1 year as a video game console. After 1 year, Atari would have the right to add a keyboard and market the complete computer, designated the 1850XLD. As Atari was heavily involved with Disney at the time, it was later codenamed Mickey, and the 256K memory expansion board was codenamed Mini. Trammell Technology. After leaving Commodore International in January 1984, Jack Tramiel formed Trammell Technology with his sons and other ex-Commodore employees and in April began planning a new computer. The company initially considered the National Semiconductor NS320XX microprocessor but was disappointed with its performance. This started the move to the 68000. Tramiel learned that Warner wanted to sell Atari, which in mid-1984 was losing about $1 million per day. Interested in Atari's overseas manufacturing and worldwide distribution network for his new computer, Tramiel negotiated with Warner in May and June 1984. He secured funding and bought Atari's consumer division in July. As executives and engineers left Commodore to join Tramiel's new Atari Corporation, Commodore responded by filing lawsuits against 4 former engineers for theft of trade secrets. The Tramiels did not purchase the employee contracts when they bought the assets of Atari Inc., so one of their first acts was to interview Atari Inc. employees to decide whom to hire at what was essentially a brand new company. This company was originally called TTL, later renamed to Atari Corp. At the time of the purchase of Atari Inc.'s assets, there were roughly 900 employees remaining from a high point of 10,000. After the interviews, approximately 100 employees were hired to work at Atari Corp. At one point, a custom sound processor called Amy was a planned component for the new Saint computer design, but the chip needed more time to complete. So Amy was dropped in favor of an off-the-shelf Yamaha sound chip. It was during this time in late July, early August that Leonard Tramiel discovered the original Amiga contract, which required Amiga Corporation to deliver the Lorraine chipset to Atari on June 30, 1984. Amiga Corp. had sought more monetary support from investors in spring 1984. Commodore and Amiga, having heard rumors that Tramiel was negotiating to buy Atari, Amiga Corp. entered into discussions with Commodore. The discussions led to Commodore wanting to purchase Amiga Corporation outright, which Commodore believed would cancel any outstanding contracts, including Atari's. Instead of Amiga Corp. delivering Lorraine to Atari, Commodore delivered a check of $500,000 to Atari on Amiga's behalf, in effect returning the funds Atari invested into Amiga for the chipset. Tramiel countersued Amiga Corp. On August 13, 1984, he sought damages and an injunction to bar Amiga from producing anything with its technology. At Commodore, the Amiga team was in limbo during the summer of 1984 because of the lawsuit. No word on the status of the chipset, the Lorraine computer, or the team's fate was known. In the fall of 1984, Commodore informed the team that the Lorraine project was active again, the chipset was to be improved, the operating system developed, and the hardware design completed. While Commodore announced the Amiga 1000 with the Lorraine chipset in July 1985, the delay gave Atari, with its many former Commodore engineers, time to deliver the first Atari ST units in June 1985. In March 1987, the two companies settled the dispute out of court in a closed decision. Operating system. With the hardware design nearing completion, the Atari team started looking at solutions for the operating system. Soon after the Atari buyout, Microsoft approached Tramiel with the suggestion that they port Windows to the platform, but the delivery date was out by about 2 years, far too long for their needs. Another possibility was Digital Research, who was working on a new GUI-based system then known as Crystal, soon to become GEM. Another option was to write a new operating system in-house, but this was rejected as Atari management was unsure whether the company had the required expertise to do so. Digital Research was fully committed to the Intel platform, so a team from Atari was sent to the Digital Research headquarters to work with the Monterey team, which comprised a mixture of Atari and Digital Research engineers. Atari's Leonard Tramiel was the Atari person overseeing Project Jason for the Atari ST line of computers. The name came from the original designer and developer, Jason Loveman. Tim Oren has an article describing the history of the project, from his series, Professional GEM. GEM was initially based on CP/M68K, essentially a direct port of CP/M to the 68000. By 1985, CP/M was becoming increasingly outdated. It did not support subdirectories, for example. Digital Research was also in the process of building a new DOS-like operating system specifically for GEM, GEMDOS, and there was some discussion of whether or not a port of GEMDOS could be completed in time for product delivery in June. The decision was eventually taken to port it, resulting in a GEMDOS file system which became part of TOS. This was beneficial as it gave the Saint a fast, hierarchical file system, essential for hard drive storage disks. Plus, programmers had function calls, similar to the IBM PC DOS. Besides the original TOS operating system, a number of third-party OSes were developed or ported to the Atari ST. Among Unix clones, Idris Minix had an Atari ST port, and the Mint OS was developed specifically for the Atari ST debut and release. After 6 months of intensive effort following Tramiel's takeover, Atari announced the 5.2 ST at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January 1985. InfoWorld described prototypes shown at computer shows as of typical Commodore 64-style, corner-cutting, low-cost Jack Tramiel product. But Atari unexpectedly displayed the Saint at COMDEX in May. Due to its similarities to the original Apple Macintosh and Tramiel's role in its development, it was quickly nicknamed the Jackintosh. Atari's rapid development of the Saint amazed many, but others were more skeptical, citing the ST's cheap appearance, Atari's uncertain financial health, and the poor relations the Tramiel-led Commodore had with software developers. As early as 1981, Adam Osborne wrote that while Tramiel deserves credit for what he has been able to accomplish, the microcomputer industry abounds with horror stories describing the way Commodore treats its dealers and its customers. In 1984, Ahoy had written, before he purchased Atari, that Tramiel had never been able to establish very good relations with computer dealers. Under his reign, computer retailers have accused Commodore of treating them as harshly as if they were suppliers or competitors. Computer Gaming World stated that his poor reputation likely made computer stores reluctant to deal with Atari, hurting the company's distribution of the Saint. One retailer said, "If you can believe Lucy when she holds the football for Charlie Brown, you can believe Jack Tramiel." And another said that, because of its experience with Tramiel, our interest in Atari is zero, zilch. Observers criticized the company's erratic discussion of its stated plans for the new computer, quickly shifting from using mass merchandisers to specialty computer stores to both. Atari executives could not name any computer stores that would carry the Saint when asked at COMDEX. One analyst stated after attending a meeting with the company, "We've seen marketing strategies change before our eyes." Tramiel's poor reputation also influenced potential developers of software for the Atari ST, with one stating that dealing with Commodore was like dealing with Attila the Hun. "I don't know if Tramiel will be following his old habits. I don't see a lot of people rushing to get software on the machine." The majority of software companies were hesitant to support another platform beyond the IBM PC, Apple, and Commodore 64. "These days, if I were a consumer, I'd stick to companies Apple and IBM I know will be around," said Philippe Kahn of Boland. The New York Times reported after COMDEX that more than 100 software titles will be available for the machine, most written by small software houses that desperately need work. Trip Hawkins of Electronic Arts said, "I don't think Atari understands the software business. I'm still skeptical about its resources and its credibility," although Michael Berlind of Infocom promised that his company would quickly publish all of its games for the new computer. He doubted that many others would soon do so. Other companies such as Spinnaker Software and Lifetree Software were more positive. Both promised to soon release Saint software, with the former reporting that Atari has a vastly improved attitude towards software developers. "They are eager to give us technical support and machines," and the latter stating, "We are giving Atari high priority." Some, such as Software Publishing Corporation, were unsure of whether to develop for the Saint or the Amiga, while John C. Dvorak wrote that the public saw both Commodore and Atari as selling cheap disposable game machines. Success Atari ST advertisement stated, "America, we built it for you," and quoted Atari president Sam Tramiel, "We promised. We delivered." with pride, determination, and good old Atari know-how. Although Atari was out of cash, sales of its 8-bit computers were very, very slow, according to Jack Tramiel, and employees feared that he would shut the company down. The 520 ST shipped during spring 1985 to the press, developers, and user groups, and in early July 1985 for general retail sales, saving the company. By November the company stated that it had sold more than 50,520 STs, with US sales alone well into 5 figures. The machine had gone from concept to store shelves in a little under a year. Atari had originally intended to release versions with 128 kilobytes and 256 kilobytes of RAM as the 130 ST and 260 ST respectively. However, with the OS loaded from floppy into RAM, there would be little or no room left over for applications to run. The 260 ST did make its way into Europe on a limited basis. The Saint supports a monochrome or color monitor. The color hardware supports 2 different resolutions, 320x200 with 16 out of 512 colors, or 640x200 with 4 out of 512 colors. The monochrome monitor was less expensive and has a single resolution of 640x400. Due to its higher vertical resolution and non-interlaced operation at 70 Hz, the monochrome monitor was better suited to business applications. The attached monitor determines available resolutions, so software either supports both types of monitors or only works with one. Color is required by a majority of games. Unlike the Amiga, Commodore 64, and Atari 8-bit computers, the Saint does not have hardware-supported sprites. The early Saint systems have no battery-backed clock, so time needs to be set after turning on. Early models shipped with Atari logo and TOS on disk, although the operating system occupies 206K RAM. But models were designed with 4 ROM sockets allow easy upgrading to the future ROM-based TOS. These became available only a few months later and were included in all new machines, as well as being available to upgrade older machines. By late 1985, the machines were also upgraded with the addition of an RF modulator, a version known as the 520 STM. Atari had originally intended to include GEM's GDOS, which allowed programs to send GEM-VDI commands to drivers loaded by GDOS. This allowed developers to send VDI instructions to other devices simply by pointing to it. However, GDOS was not ready at the time the Saint started shipping and was included in software packages and later Saint machines. Later versions of GDOS supported vector fonts. A limited set of GEM fonts were also included within the ROMs. These fonts also feature a standard 8x8 pixel graphical character set for the Saint containing standard numbers, letters, symbols, accented characters, and 4 unusual characters. The Saint was less expensive than most machines, including the Macintosh Plus, and tended to be faster than most. Largely as a result of the price-performance factor, the Saint would go on to be a fairly popular machine, notably in European markets where the foreign exchange rates amplified prices. Indeed, the company's English advertising strapline of the era was "Power without the price." In fact, an Atari Street and Terminal emulation software was much cheaper than a digital VT220 terminal, which was commonly needed by offices with central computers.